Let's go ahead and make an assignment using MyLab and get that assignment into Canvas for students to use, as well as use the auto grading feature. So we're going to open MyLab and Mastery from Canvas, and that should take us to our course homepage or the gradebook. It'll take us to our course. What we're going to do is we're going to go over to the homework section over on the left. And we're again, anytime we want to add or adjust something, we want to go over to Manage and change it to Manage instead of just View so that we can add and create items. So what we want to do, this is new for me. Bear with me, apparently they've made some adjustments over the summer. So we have nothing here, so let's go ahead and create an assignment. Now you can do tests and quizzes in MyLab. I would wait to do those until you're really comfortable with the program. Monitoring and proctoring the assessments in MyLab can be a little tedious, especially since our monitoring software on iPad isn't the best. So I don't recommend doing it unless you're using it for a non-graded summative, or sorry, a non-graded formative purpose. So we're going to just go ahead and create homework. And we're going to title it. And I'm just going to title it example homework. Now you want to make sure that you click this box that says send grades for this assignment to the Canvas gradebook. That means that as students complete their assignment, it'll automatically populate into Canvas and you don't have to worry about updating the grades. And they'll see their grades change in Canvas in relatively real time. So we'll click next, and this is where we get to select our questions. So it's going to default on whatever book you chose. And so I'm going to go ahead and pick chapter. Okay, so you can go chapter, pick chapter 3. You can, and it'll show you all the questions. These are custom questions that I created. Don't worry about those right now. But it'll show you all the questions that are available in chapter 3, and you can see there are quite a lot of questions available to choose from. So let's narrow it down by section, and I'm doing a homework section for the first look on the line. And these are all the objectives. And maybe I'm not covering all these objectives, or I don't want to assess all these. You don't have to choose all of these, but what you can do is just one at a time, kind of pick, and you can do check marks and click the add button. It'll move them over. When you hover over, it'll give you a little preview. I wouldn't trust the preview exactly because sometimes they're wrong. Rarely, not often, but rarely they are wrong. So what you can also do is click on a question and it'll pull up what the student would see worked out. See right here, it says show completed problem, where you can say work problems to students. So it tells you here's what the question is, that's the stem, and this is where the answer is going to go. So the directions say select the correct choice, so they'll choose A or B. The correct one is A, and then they're going to fill in the blank and they'll see these directions. So they say, okay, yeah, I like this question. Let's go ahead and add that one. And then it's going to go ahead and preview over here to the next item. So I started at question 1, now it's on 2. I don't need another one of those. Let's skip that one. Question 3, that's kind of the same. All right. Question 4, you know what? I'm kind of okay with it. Let's go ahead and add it. And you can go through and just add questions here on the right. And let's go through and let's see if there's one that's more difficult. Okay, this one's a little bit different. It's got a graph, so they have to look at the points. And so, oh yeah, I want to include a question like that, where they have to look at the points and use slope formula. And again, it also shows the difficulty and the median time. Again, the median time is a very loose estimate on the amount of time it takes for a student to do that. So don't expect this is going to take them just a minute. You know, some of these kids, it may take them a minute just to read the question. But it gives you a general idea when you're comparing questions as far as difficulty goes. And so you can add questions, change sections, add some more questions. And if you decide, oh, you know what, I don't actually want that question in there, you're going back and looking through and say, oh, well, I have 3.4.7 in here twice. You can take it, click it, remove it. I want them to do this interpretation question first because, you know, why not put the most difficult problem in the beginning? You can click on it and you can move it up or down and then unclick. If you choose multiple items and choose up or down, it's going to move them and still keep that ordering. So notice how there is a gap in between. So it's going to keep that gap. So be aware of that. And then there's our questions. If I just don't like the questions that are in my book, or I'm missing one type of question and I really, really want, we don't have to use our book. We can add from another book as well. You have to include at least one question from your book, but then you can include up to 20 questions from any other book in the Pearson catalog. And so I'm just looking for another question. You can search by title, you can search by objective, and I want parallel lines. If I can spell parallel lines correctly. And when you click search, it's going to narrow down the results to books that have parallel lines, and it'll tell you where you can find those objectives. So in chapter GA, under these objectives, I can find that. I'll select that book, and I'll go ahead and look for parallel lines somewhere in here. It doesn't really matter. Just pick something. And you can add that question, and you see the star says, hey, you got this from another book. That's all that means. And so now you have this question added. So now what we can do, something else that we can also do from our book, and occasionally from others, but usually just from ours, we can return to the course book, is that we can look at different media types. And so within chapter 3, I can look at the change different media, and I can see that, oh, there's some videos available, or some animations that these students can watch, or some PowerPoints. And so maybe I want them to review something on plotting points. I can insert this video and put that at the top. So that way they have to watch the video first, and then they can work on the questions that go with it. So now that we have that added in, what we can do is we can also, you can add your own real quick. I'll add that if you want to embed a YouTube video. You can click add my own media, and it allows you to embed a YouTube video. So now this is where we choose the settings of when the assignment's available, when it's due, if they get any penalty for late work. You can set all of that here. Now note that what you set here, you may want to have as less strict rather than more strict, because it's kind of harder to change it on a group basis. And you may make some adjustments as you go. There's a little bit of a learning curve with some trial and error figuring out how to get this to work. So you may have to be patient with yourself as well as with your students while you're doing this. But here's some of my best practices. I make the assignment available the day that we're working on it. And so I know, okay, I'm going to teach this on August 22nd. You can change the start time, 12 a.m. Sometimes, oh, I don't want my kids working on it, first thing in the morning before I even do chance to do the lesson. So you can say, okay, you can't even see it before 7 a.m. And then you're going to go ahead and select the due date. And so, okay, I signed it on the 22nd, and I want it to be due on the 23rd by the end of the day. I don't want them to work, I want them to be done before the evening, so it's due at 12 p.m. or even at 11 or 11:59. Okay, so you can select whatever time you want for it to be due. And so I'm giving them that time to work on it. And then what you'll want to do is check for late submission. So go ahead and select this. Now, if you're going to want to deduct points if it's late, it's better to default it now and adjust it for students on a case-by-case basis later than to not do it at all. There's some options here. Require password means that they have to put in a password before they can open it if the assignment's late. So if they try to open it on August 24th, they have to put in a password of whatever you choose. Monkey. Okay, whatever password you want. And it's really easy to take off this requirement for students later. So that's why you see I normally put in just garbage letters. When I put in mine, I just do something random, because if I have a student that says, hey, I want to work on this assignment, I was absent or whatever, then it's really easy for me to go in MyLab and remove this requirement just for them so they can continue to work on it, but no one else can. You can choose to require a final submission. I normally don't do it that often. I don't know why that popped up. I normally don't click this out often. It doesn't ever matter, because once we move into the next quarter or whatever, but you can set this, Johnny has until the 30th. he was out for several days, he has until the 30th. You can choose that, all right, he only gets to work on it until this time, and then that's it, nothing else. Deduct late submission penalty. I do this a lot for my courses. It's really easy to take it off later. It's really hard to add it on after. So if you do decide to allow a student to work on it late, and they don't have a good reason for being late, but maybe they need the extra practice or whatever reason, you're being generous, they have a late submission penalty. And so you can choose either from final score per day and say, okay, you did it late, you get a 20% penalty on your assignment. And the program will automatically take off 20% if it's done late. I'll normally just apply it to the questions that are done late. So that way, they finished 9 of the questions on time, but they just didn't get the last one in. Well, they're only going to get that deduction on that one question that they didn't get finished. So I'll usually pick that. I'll always do this based on my late penalty policy because, again, it's a lot easier to remove it for a student later than to try and add it to a student after the fact. So I'll do this even if I don't. I think it's very unlikely that I'll use it. I'm not going to let them use extra time, whatever the reason is. But again, it's easier to include it now and take it off later than it is to put it on later. So I'll usually do that. Allow partial credit for questions multiple parts. I usually leave this checked. That's up to you, but there are some multi-step questions, and partial credit just makes life a whole lot easier. Attempts per question. Don't worry about the prereqs. I usually ignore those. Attempts per question. Normally, I leave this alone. The way that the program works is that it will allow students to reattempt questions over and over and over. It'll after a while, it'll change the numbers so they're not just doing the same thing over and over. It'll allow them to reattempt it until they get full credit. So that way, in theory, there's no reason for your students not to get 100% on all of their homeworks because they can do them over and over and over until they get it right. If you find students are abusing this, you can click this and set a limit on how many times they can attempt a question before the score you get is what you get. In theory, or in practice, with most questions, a limit of 3 is actually 9 attempts because you get 3 attempts on most questions before it marks it wrong and gives you a new problem. So 3 attempts is actually 9 chances that they get to get the correct answer across 3 different questions. If you add in a video like we did on this one, you can require students to watch that video before proceeding on to the question. So that's all that means. I do this so that way if they get a question right, they can't accidentally go back and undo all of that good work. So indicate and lock all correct answers after each check answer. Save questions, leave it alone, allow students to print this assignment, and it doesn't matter. I almost never had students print it, so it doesn't make a difference. This is where you can change the learning aids. Now remember when we set up our course, I had you get rid of the show me an example, which is why you don't see it here. You can manually remove any of these as well from this specific assignment. Say, you know what, I just don't want you asking me questions on this one. So I'm going to take that off. And then graphing allows students to move points by typing coordinates. I'm going to let you know, MyLab on an iPad is awful for graphing. I highly recommend against using the graphing utilities if your students are using iPads. If we have a laptop, it's way easier to point and click with a mouse. So this usually doesn't matter as much. I highly, highly, highly recommend against the graphing utilities while students are using iPads. Importing, if you want to make an assignment and share it with your team, if you click this, it allows for them to import it. And then if you're ready for this assignment to go live, you don't need to make any changes. You can click Save and Assign. If you need to come back to it later and add more questions, click Save, and then that way you won't accidentally get it locked because students have started working on it. So you can click Save and Assign if you're ready to go, and you'll see it's going to get added to your courses. And so under the assignment manager, now we have this assignment. You can toggle assigned on and off. If it's off, your students will not be able to see it. If it's on, they'll be able to see it. So now that we have this here, our assignment's created, what we can do is we can check that our grade book is good. I recommended doing this in the beginning. We want to make sure that our weights are okay. So I'm going to go to the grade book. I'm going to manage. And I'm going to double check the change weights and the grade sync settings. So under change weights, it's still on assignment weight only, which is what I want. Homework is weighted at 10. And now I see my example homework is here weighted at 10. If I wanted to change it and I only want it worth 5, well, now I can change it to 5. So that's only worth 5 points. Or maybe I want this one to be 15 points. So we can make that adjustment here if we want. And then we save that. And then, of course, the other thing that we want to check, go back to the grade book, is check the grade sync settings. And then we see my example homework here, assignment weighted scores. So it's weighted 10 points and it's going to be sent to Canvas so that we don't have to worry about the grading. So we can click done on that. And now we're going to go back to Canvas. So I'm going to click back on the tab up here for Canvas. And I'm going to click on grade sync. And now I see my example homework. And so what you can do is you can turn automatic grade sync on and off. I usually have it on. And then we're going to pick items that we want to sync. So in order for the grades to move from MyLab and Mastery into Canvas, grade sync has to be on. And so now that we have this on, anytime a student does their homework, the grade will get synced over to Canvas. And then what's going to happen is it's automatically going to create an assignment for us as well. And so let's go ahead and check under assignments, and we should see example homework. Okay. Now, sometimes it doesn't show up right away. It usually might take 5-10 minutes. Something we can try to do to speed up that process is we can go back to MyLab and Mastering, and under grade sync, we can go ahead and force a sync by pressing sync grades now. And now we'll see something in our grade book. So let's go back to assignments. And see now we have example homework. Okay. And so we can see it's not available till this date, when it's due, and how many points it's worth. And that's based on that weight settings. So if we want, we can go ahead and add this into modules. So we just go to a module and say, okay, we're doing our example homework. And it will show up under assignments, add into the modules, and there's all the information that they have for the example homework. When students click on the assignment from Canvas, until they can view it, it says, hey, you cannot take this homework assignment. But once they are allowed to view it, what's going to show up in that screen is the assignment with all the questions. They can start clicking on questions and working through it. And that's the basics of making an assignment for Canvas. When we move into new quarters, or even when I know a student's not going to be working on a specific assignment any longer, there's no need to have that grade sync there. So, okay, I've moved into quarter 2. I don't want this to change my gradebook anymore, so I can unclick this and then just make sure that I have the assignments synced that are current for that quarter or however you're going to be doing your grading practices.